you, Mr. Fitzgerald, since you raised the third rail of MI5, I'd like to ask you a related question to that. Actually, Dr. K and Mr. Fitzgerald, Ms. Doran, the reason you're here, of course, is because our staff thinks that you, among all the professionals in the intelligence community, understand Al-Qaeda better than anyone else. We have been grappling with the issue that has been raised to us by two presidents, that they were unable to get a clear answer from FBI as to who did the Cole operation. Really, definitively until the summer, almost 10 months later. When did each of you conclude, after the October bombing of the Cole, that Al-Qaeda did it? Dr. K?
Well, if you first ask, approach it from the perspective of personal suspicions, I don't think there were many analysts at the time who doubted that Al-Qaeda was responsible. And I think we were operating at the time with two concepts we had to deal with. One, responsibility in terms of, when you talk about command and control, who ordered it, who directed it. And the other, which may or may not be related, was who carried it out, who did it. I mean, in terms of actually launched the boat, planted the bombs, and bombed the ship. And the message clearly that we relayed to the policymakers within the first month after the Cole bombing was that individuals with various degrees of association with Al-Qaeda carried out the bombing. I think you heard that from Director Tenet, and that's exactly the message. What we couldn't say from an intelligence perspective was who ordered the bombing, who directed the bombing. That we did not have the information, and that, as the staff statement accurately tells, wasn't, we didn't have the smoking gun, so to speak, until 2 years later.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes. Well, let me tell you how right we can be and how wrong we can be. The moment I heard about the August '98 bombings in Kenya and Tanzania simultaneously, when I heard it on the radio, I said, bin Laden. When I saw the Cole bombing and I saw that he had issued a video beforehand, as I believe, with the Yemeni dagger in his belt, thought bin Laden. On the other hand, when we had the Murrah Federal Building go up in Oklahoma City while we're in trial with the Blind Sheikh in New York, I think many people thought the Blind Sheikh. We never thought Timothy McVeigh. So was the initial reaction from the Cole bombing certainly that bin Laden did it? Absolutely. Just like on September 11th, there was no doubt in my mind. But that's what you think, and then there's what you can prove. I know that the people, my colleagues in New York who worked the Cole bombing case, when they knew they could prove it, they charged it. But an instant reaction that you think he's behind it because of the whole circumstances, what his MO is, because of the Yemeni dagger in his belt, because of his speech, but you recognize that you could be mistaken. The first World Trade Center bombing, they first looked at Bosnians and Serbs as to whether they carried it out. So you want to temper your instant reaction that I know the answer, because you recognize that you can be dead right or you can be dead wrong.
And by November 25th, after the Collad material, was there any doubt in your mind who did it? You personally, I'm asking.
I wasn't involved in that case, so the November 25th, that date doesn't mean anything to me. I was involved in getting ready for the trial, and someone else was working on it. So I can't fix in my mind what that material meant to me. So I can't give you a good answer to that.
Ms. Doran?
First off, as Pat mentioned, when it happened, when the Cole was attacked, I think all of us, our first reaction was, yes, this has got to be Al-Qaeda. And the deployment of FBI investigators to Yemen reflects our belief it was Al-Qaeda, in that normally our Washington field office would have had extraterritorial responsibility to respond to anything happening in areas such as Yemen. But in this instance, the investigators were sent from the New York office, which was already the office of origin for the Al-Qaeda investigation. So they were the first teams sent immediately after the attack. And my understanding from my colleagues in New York who worked the case was that by sometime in November, early November, they the investigations had led to the point where they believed and they could show that it was al-Qaeda.
But that's the very heart of the issue we've been trying to get at. What is wrong with our intelligence community that the President of the United States was not given a definitive answer on who done it so that a retaliation decision could be made until August, 10 months later. Now, there are two contending schools of thought that emerge from our witnesses. First, we've found no witness that was involved that was not sure it was al-Qaeda by the end of November. And so there are some that say they didn't want to box in the White House, whichever president was in charge. They didn't want to back him into a corner by forcing him to have to retaliate, so they kept a hedge on it. Those who don't like that political answer say no, that it's a classic case of FBI and their obsession with making their criminal case. They had 300 agents and prosecutors building a case to prosecute, and they did not and could not until they reached the evidentiary standards of a trial take that word preliminary finding off until the summer. Mr. Fitzgerald, which theory do you buy?
Well, maybe we should look back at what the question is. If we're looking to see whether or not, if someone decided whether it made sense to launch any sort of strike, we already conclusively established that al-Qaeda had bombed the embassies in August of 1998. Part of that charge, we'd already laid out the attack in Somalia. So by 1998, before the call ever happened, we already had established and had committed to it that there was proof beyond any reasonable doubt that al-Qaeda had already attacked Americans. So I don't know why, if we focus properly as we should, and as the team that investigated and prosecuted that case, to decide when you want to file a court charge that attributes the Cole bombing to someone as being something that carried out operationally, that's a different question than whatever policymakers have to decide about how we deal with this threat. We had already established that al-Qaeda had attacked Americans and attacked our embassies 2 years before the call ever happened.
But both presidents told us that FBI would not tell them for sure that al-Qaeda did it.
And you know, I wasn't part of the Cole investigation proper, and I wasn't part of what the FBI said when they said. So I can't give you an intelligent answer as to, you know, why they said things or what people thought. I don't
Ms.
want to.
Doran?
All I can say is I know the investigators were doing their job and putting together the case, and they would have passed that information up, and the things you're talking about happen at a much higher level than where I am.
Mr. Pistole, would you like to help us which level
Yes,
the
Secretary.
buck stopped?
Be glad to attempt, Mr. Secretary. Obviously, the distinction between the criminal justice standard for proof beyond a reasonable doubt is different from the intelligence community standard of whether somebody was responsible for a particular act. And the standard of proof in a courtroom is not what is the requisite item for whether some type of retaliatory strike is made. The issue was whether the information was made aware to both the law enforcement and intelligence community, and that clearly was the case. What the decision makers did with that information, which I think is the gist of your question, was something that was decided within the National Security Council, and
That's an important statement that we have not heard. So it is your position that the White House was told that al-Qaeda done it, quite apart from
No.
evidentiary.
No, I didn't say that, Mr. Secretary. What I said was that, and what I'm trying to convey, is that the information that was available through the law enforcement community, in particular the FBI, as to the standard of proof and the items of proof that would be used in any charging, had already been outlined, as Pat mentioned, for the 98 embassy bombings. The intelligence community was aware of that information, as well as the information that had been obtained both overseas and domestically on the Cole bombing in terms of Nashiri's involvement, Galad's involvement. That information was where. I don't know who specifically was briefed on what day. If that's your question, I don't have that information.
Thank you. My time's up, but it's a good little illustration of the MI5 debate.